No, I'll just make two quick comments on that, Steve. I don't want to do lots and lots of talking, but the one is that the cloud native spec is a modicum of a step towards a standardizing of payload, like event definitions, right? Which is always a thing in IoT that's been a struggle. And then the other is that the serverless, and like you say, and part of where I've kind of disappeared off to is I've been spending a lot of time working around our Cloud Run product, which is not an edge thing at all, but it's serverless and scales to zero. So the Knative side of it does somewhat solve that latency start, because you do run essentially the event or request routing parts in Kubernetes all the time, and then are only starting up, serving containers. So Knative's a little bit better than scaling up from zero for other Kubernetes stuff, because part of it's running all the time, so it can buffer the request. Anyway,
hello.
I'm just helping look for things that are, because Cloud Events went 1.0. There's a timing relevance of saying, hey, here's an introduction to this notion. But my kind of issue with it is it's still very notional. It's not like we can go and tell a super concrete real story around it.
Hello.
Yeah, hi.
Hey, this is Cindy.
Oh, hi.
So, hi, how are you?
Yeah, we just started talking about.
Yeah, I was listening. So I think I like what we talked. So just to share how I was thinking, like we build we use Kubernetes to deploy or run applications onto edge, and then we know like a Kubernetes to manage it is hard. So for this talk, I was also hoping to understand the pain points for DevOps developers and operators. So what are the what can we do to help them? Like, can we use CRD or like Helm, or are we having the right tools for developers to write their applications and then be able to deploy, run easily? So that's another thought for the talk. And then, as you all know, we are gonna do a survey against all the attendees. So I'm hoping like we can get some broad understanding of how people are doing and how people are thinking. What do you guys think?
That sounds good. I haven't come up with in any draft of survey questions myself.
Yeah, I was planning to ask like in our team this meeting, like people who are in our Slack channel, ask people to like chime in what kind of, from their perspective, what are they interested to know. It's a good opportunity because a lot of people are attending the conference.
Yeah. One of the things I think is key, because I've seen so many of these surveys that I see results and sit there shaking my head kind of suspicious, because I think a common problem is these surveys go out to very selective communities that have sampling bias. And if this goes out to the broad CNCF list, I think only a tiny subset of that actually does stuff and is knowledgeable at edge, but that doesn't keep others from responding. And I think that one of the keys, as important as the questions, will be maybe distributing that survey out to secondary audiences that have more of an edge focus. Like if we can get the Eclipse Edge people to also redirect that survey so that we can target it at people in the edge community. I think that.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, I was hoping like we can get a better understanding, and even for serverless, run a serverless or also deploy a serverless function to cloud is much easier than we do to the edge. Yeah.
I think there's a couple of broad topics I would like to see in the survey. So one thing is the deployment models people use. So what kind of like GitOps or CI/CD chains people are today planning to use, or what they see missing. Other is all this communication issue, right? So cloud events or MQTT or you know, gRPC, you know, where are people now? I would like to, you know, fish out the problems for the people, you know, okay, what are they using today, but what they really missing in all these tool chains to be able to more effectively build services.
Yeah, and also like for the programming model, because where people are writing applications, but they run in a much distributed fashion, and then the network topology is complicated. So I'm not sure if you guys know a project called Dapr. That's what recently Microsoft contributed to the community. I've seen a lot of people are interested in it and contributing. So the idea is to ease people's pain when they write or deploy a distributed application.
So
it can be
what was this
applied
first?
to Edge as well.
Can you spell out the project name?
It's called Dapr, D-A-P-R.
Yeah, no, I've never heard of it.
I think it's only a few months, like half a year now. I've seen it's 5.2K now stars, or even more. It's a lot of people are like trying it. Yeah, personally, I just know the idea, but I haven't hands-on on it yet.
It's so one way you can think of it is it's taking the sort of service mesh sidecar idea of something like Istio, and then instead kind of building it as an SDK client library that you deploy with your app. So in other words, to sort of talk to other services or do things with other services in this grouping, you instead of making a request or generating an event, you use a very rich SDK, and then it handles all the service to service or event type stuff. So
yeah, I think like, for example, if you want to do state management to ensure the data replication, so the sidecar is extensible. You can plug in your own like store or caching. So for example, you can plug in Redis, and then like they'll help you to replicate the state.
Well, I guess now I'm confused, because after Preston's comment, I was thinking when he said SDK and library that it was more like statically linked as opposed to sidecar model. And maybe
it is a sidecar model.
Oh, okay.
It is using sidecar in the pod, and then like but the sidecar can be extended. It can be extended. You can pick and choose what kind of like middleware to plug in.
Well, maybe that's a topic for a future meeting if somebody wants to take on maybe I'm wrong, but to me, I'm sitting here thinking, never having heard of Dapr, that it's something similar to Knative. And now I'd like to compare the two.
I think Preston, correct me if I'm wrong. I thought Knative is for the event, like a serverless kind of event communication or something. Yeah.
Yeah, they're definitely different. They're different patterns.
Purpose.
I mean, I guess one way I sort of think of the Dapr thing is it's a little bit like, you know, it's designed for building event kind of cascading applications. So like almost like taking something like the old Node-RED model of flow-based programming and sort of, but deploying it as independent services that know how to route and relay data through a set of things. I'm trying to remember the name of the app CRD analog Microsoft basically announced on the same day. They did sort of this double announcement. It was Dapr and then
The other one is called OAM. It's
Yeah.
operation. I forgot model.
And that was basically about separating the concerns of the application developer from the operator and deployer, so that
Yes.
apps would have sort of parametric descriptions, so that as an operator deploying an app, you knew which settings and configuration would need, because it sort of had advertised them in this format. There you go. Yeah, that's it. Yeah.
Yeah, I think like we can, I can help talk more, because obviously I know people here in Microsoft, they know the detail. I need to prepare a bit and then help this working group.
Yeah, I'd say that as long as Dapper makes sense at Edge and it's open source, maybe you can arrange to have a presentation at this at the working group meeting.
Sounds good.
So what's our next agenda for the meeting?
We started this meeting with nothing in the agenda.
Oh, okay.
I can throw out a few community notices. Since some of us are on the West Coast, this maybe isn't super attractive to the rest of you, but there are definitely IoT related sessions at the upcoming Scale conference. And then in April, there is this Linux Foundation ONES conference with CFPs open for a little less than another week. And they have, one of the categories is Kubernetes at Edge for that conference.
Thanks, Steve. Do you mind sharing in the link or something, Slack?
Yeah, let me grab a link to the conference and I'll put it in chat in the meeting notes.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Just a minute.
I wonder, like, remember you mentioned like for the upcoming KubeCon, we can ask people to see if they like to have an in-person meeting, right?
Right. Yeah, we've been doing that, even if it isn't formal.
Yeah.
I think we should try to do a face-to-face. I think lunch works well.
Yes.
In my experience, because people have to go to lunch anyway. And we can either meet at a restaurant nearby, or the other thing that works is to simply get some signs made. And the conference itself, I presume, is going to have a lunch area where we can put out some signs on tables so that we can find each other and just meet during the standard conference lunch, whatever people would prefer.
Yeah.
I'm not that familiar with the area in Amsterdam. Sometimes the Linux Foundation ends up locating these in kind of isolated areas without a lot of options nearby. Has anybody been to the area where KubeCon Europe is?
No. Yeah.
Who on this call is likely to be there?
I'll be there.
Okay. Yeah, I will be too.
I'll be there as
too.
well.
I'll probably sit this one out. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I'm guessing we can probably get a group of, I don't know, 8 to 15 people, just conjecture, but there are definitely people interested in IoT Edge. I've been to conferences where they definitely turn out.
I know, like
in Barcelona, we had a fair
yeah.
turnout for the Huawei sponsored lunch.
So Steve and Dijan, Dan, you guys had a podcast last time, right?
We did. We got approached at the event by a couple people. One was the New Stack, and the other was, I don't remember the name, but it was a telco-focused podcast based in Argentina that I wasn't even familiar with, and the CNCF people get approached by press. So this wasn't something that we saw coming in advance. It was just during the event. Somebody from the CNCF tracked us down and asked if we could do it.
Yeah, I was just wonder, like, as a working group in this Kubernetes community, what can we do to like evangelize some of the technologies and help people like more effectively?
Yeah, well, I think it's just take advantage of the opportunities to reach out and talk about subjects people are interested in. And I think that those podcasts amounted to something where you got the initial visibility so that people knew you were out there, and then word spread and they found us. It wasn't that we went seeking them.
Yeah. Yeah, that's very cool.
Somehow I personally don't want to go out there in search of press and analysts, but if they come to me, that's fine. So the other thing that I think would be worthy of a future meeting would be to talk in our group about the new event service, Preston, that you brought up. Do you know of a good or an authoritative speaker on the subject who might be willing to give a talk on it to our group?
Well, Cindy brought it up, and Cindy's now. Cindy, I didn't even realize you'd moved to Microsoft, but it's a Microsoft project, so I would be happy to hear more about it.
Yeah, sure.
Well, are you talking Dapper or
both? Both of them are Microsoft projects.
Maybe Steve, you're talking about the cloud events,
right? Yes,
and that's more a CNCF-like thing, I would say.
Yeah.
So I can see if I can find someone who can talk about cloud events. Yeah.
Sure.
So Preston, do you see the value of the cloud events in this context outside of the Knative as well?
Well, look, everyone would like to have more interop for IoT events. That's been a thing forever. The other interesting thing that's happened that I don't think is strictly edge related, but is at least a bright spot in a generally dark landscape, is the chip alignment between Google, Amazon, and Apple around Weave and Thread, which has inside it, deep in Weave, is an event spec and some other API stuff. But I think in general, when it comes to all things in IoT and edge, that people would rather build to open standards that define things like event payload shapes or envelopes, at least, right? And I think cloud events will be interesting for two things. One is if there's enough traction among event producers, like cloud platforms to produce events so that they can be picked up on. And then the other is to reuse the spec in custom bespoke deployments that aspire to create their own ecosystems at some point, right? That's would be the other way that cloud events would be relevant.
I'm thinking from the perspective of for example, Eclipse Hono, where we try to not do the same, but a little bit similar thing. Just try to define basically the messaging APIs for telemetries and commands and things like that. So and that also then maps to different protocols, to HTTP, to MQTT. What I'm trying to figure out is there something we could do there to align with the cloud events as well, and
maybe. I mean, I think it's unfortunate that there's an unavoidable proliferation of adapters, right? And it's sort of like, oh, there's too many formats. We need a new format to adapt all the formats into a new format that's universal. So that's an age-old issue. But I do think that sometimes like a adapter between systems that have their own, you get a lot more mileage out of an adapter of an envelope to an envelope where each of those envelopes has its own ecosystem, right? Because that way, with one adapter, you're unlocking many and possible translations. But yeah.
Yeah, I think the adapter does make sense when something already got established to bring it into a different thing that's become popular. That makes sense. I mean, the whole gateway thing could be viewed as that either from a software or a hardware perspective, right? To bridge between something with an existing installed base rather than try to revolutionize the world from.
Well, and I mean, I think the pragmatic, brutal reality is that in any given project, you just write whichever adapter you need specific for your use case and payload. And any project that kind of tries to come up with a universal translation framework of like an all-encompassing adapter thing isn't something you'd probably want to use because it becomes overly complicated for what you need to do when you can just write your own adapter for what you need, right? So it's that trade-off between reusability and pragmatism, I think, that's a tough space for things like event adapters.
Yeah, but I think that there's a complementary features between cloud events and what HONO is trying to do, because we don't consider payload at all. So for example, for MQTT, it's just a binary blob that gets passed. So what we focus on is like a topic name,
envelope transport. Yeah.
Oh no, just more like a communication patterns, like topic name spaces, and then how do you address things, and how do you things, and the idea is to have exactly a stream of telemetry data on a single address in the backend, no matter how it came. But the metadata we put there is really, really minimal. So I think it might make sense to try to take a look at if we can at least standardize a little bit on the metadata that's defined in cloud events, and so make it more usable from the backend.
Yeah, I'll try to find some time comparing the cloud event to HONO. But I got to run, folks. Unfortunately, I got another one on the half-hour mark. But good to see you all.
Okay.
Take care.
Bye. Okay, so I suggest we send I can do that as well. Just ask people in the channel to see what kind of survey questions they are interested in. We'll consolidate. Meanwhile, I set up a meeting with Kim from CNCF. We can follow the right process and create the my thought is to use the CNCF Survey Monkey, and then we can start from there.
Yeah. So I've done some of these surveys before. So here's a suggestion that instead of just having people put questions in the channel, Slack is kind of bad for searching for all of those and having them kind of run off the edge if you get a lot. It might be better to just open a Google Doc with shared access to the group and let people type in, maybe even a spreadsheet.
Okay.
Ultimately, then you'll hopefully come up with more than we can afford. An interesting aspect of these surveys is if you put one out there with 100 questions, people give up on it and don't hit submit, and then you hardly get any entries. So what you really need in one of these surveys is something where you say, NCF will send out an email, and the email has to say something like, could you give us 5 or 10 minutes? If you suggest this survey is going to take more than about 10 to complete, the only people with enough skin in the game to put that kind of time into it are going to be vendors trying to promote something, and the results will show that kind of influence. So if you really want the users to participate, you're going to have that letter, give them a time box saying that, look, we're only asking for some people suggest 5 minutes, some 10. And
Mhm.
to get it down to that, it means you can't have more than about 20 questions, in my opinion. Maybe if they were really quick yes, no things, but if you've got to think about the questions, you can't have that many. And we're going to have to collect prospective questions and then maybe have a internal survey that votes which ones we use.
Yeah, sounds good. Yeah. So I think we can also collect what James from Eclipse, he did the survey before, right? So we can also like see his thoughts. Yeah.
So Cindy, will you create a doc in our drive so we can start with that? I think it's a good idea.
Yeah, sure. I can do that. So I forward you the invite with the meeting with Kim. Yeah, it's gonna be late for you, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
I'll give it a try.
The other thing maybe we'd want to do in the survey, but some is get a question. Some of them are to gather information, but some of them might be to classify the audience or the answerers. And one of the issues with Edge is that we've got some fundamentally different use cases where, the one I describe as kind of retail remote office have enough resource budget money-wise and space-wise to run multi-node Kubernetes clusters, yet device edge, they're probably hard-pressed to come up with the resource for one. I'd expect quite different answers on the survey questions from those, but it'd be nice to know what they're coming from so that when we present the results, we maybe can characterize it as saying, look, people with this use case think these items are critically important, yet ones with a different one lean a different way.
Yeah. Yeah, that's one of the points. Like, I also want to know, like, what are the pain points people are hitting? Like, is that security or like resource constraint or like some tooling? What are they?
And as Steve said, I think it's important to distinguish what kind of problem are people trying to solve with Edge. So what use case are they targeting?
Yeah, those are great ones. Yes. Okay. So then, are you gonna make it for the conference or not?
No, probably not. So the other proposal
okay. Yeah.
was turned down, and so I'll yeah.
Okay.
The rule in our company is you need to speak to get a free trip.
Yeah. Okay.
We'll have to see. We've had some people in the group coming from China too, but I understand that recently with the travel has become coming out of that region.
Oh yeah, but it's gonna be in March, right?
Yeah, hopefully things will calm down.
So I hope it will calm down. Yeah.
Yeah, although historically the way these things go, they go up before they come down.
We don't know. Let's cross fingers. I hope everyone is good. It's fine.
Yeah, I just hope it doesn't spread to the Northern Europe region when we have to go there.
True. Yeah. Okay. I just get to the office. I have to drop off. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Nice talking to you guys.
All right.
Bye.
Bye.
So any other topics, or should we?
I was just going to add that that'll be helpful to have a docking drive, so that we can take a look at what we're asking there. And I'm definitely interested in getting information out of it. But Steve, I think you're right, which is you have a lot to handle here. Otherwise, you get noise, and then you rely on it, and then that's bad, right? So we definitely don't want noise, and I'm going to definitely add things in there or help refine. But anyhow, cool. No, that's all I had on that topic. I just wanted to add a comment.
Sounds good.
Then maybe we can help. We've still got the person on the call for the MicroK8S talk that will come up in a future meeting. If anybody here has any particular things they'd like to see covered in that or details, maybe we can help them put together whatever might be done. I personally have played around with running it and the K3S out of Rancher on Pies. And anything you'd want to mention comparing the two, or why one, would have features different from another, I would find interesting.
Yes. Okay. So yes, that would be really interesting. We are actually getting this question really often, so we should somehow come up with a good answer.
Yeah.
Yeah, positioning it. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I think my experience just kind of doing kind of the casual driving around the block was that the superficial installation experience was roughly comparable. If they both in common have kind of cut out unneeded things in Kubernetes to put Kubernetes on a diet to demand lesser resources, but maybe they've taken some different elections on how they go about that. In terms of replacing etcd or not, and what you replace it with. And I think they've both taken out cloud providers and storage providers, but they might have different aspects of how, should you want to get one of those things back in, you'd manage to do it.
So wait. MicroK8 does not take anything out from the binaries. It's the upstream binaries right now.
All right.
And we don't drop anything. The part that I think is relevant to this group, and I dare to say we're doing a good job there, is because MicroK8 is basically a snap. It solves a problem in the edge case where you may have multiple deployments spread around physical locations. And with MicroK8, you can upgrade them transparently wherever they are without actually needing to be physically there. So,
and then I assume, I'm not an expert on Snap by any stretch, but a key aspect might be if it does this, if you can upgrade in place while saving your existing configuration, that obviously is attractive.
Yeah. So yes, this is exactly what we do. In place, we basically release the same day as upstream. We take the binaries, package them, ship them. Well, if you're following a stable release, you get a delay of 1 week just in case. But yeah, this is one of the issues that we feel we have addressed very elegantly. And the other issue that IoT devices often face is because they might be we've seen that often on the IoT world and the edge world, you need some extra security. So there is this idea that the entire Kubernetes cluster runs under what we call strict confinement. That is essentially an enhanced security state where everything runs under AppArmor. And it adds another layer of security. So
okay, in terms of the update, another thing that I know many at Edge like to see is a story of supporting not only the upgrade, but should things go horribly wrong with the upgrade, being able to put it back.
Yes.
Kind of atomic upgrades with the potential for rollbacks.
Yes. Yeah. So these are really good points. I hope we will be able to cover them in the next meeting. But this comes again as we inherit this as part of the snaps, where basically when you get a new revision, it tries to start. If it's not starting, it rollbacks exactly the way it was. So yes, you're right. This is a common ask. Don't break us, and if you do, please roll back the entire infrastructure, not just the workload that I'm running on.
Okay. Okay. So yeah, I just wanted to give you an idea because I know when I present, I'd like to have some direction out of my audience on what they'd like to see. Anybody else got any ideas or questions they've had about micro K8s that?
Yeah, not at this particular moment.
I think if you can, when you present, if you could talk about the scale out, the federation and opportunities, right? Because I think you've got a lot of great thinking around what life is going to be like to bring Kubernetes down to the edge in this way, but then bringing Kubernetes itself down introduces a lot of challenges regarding large-scale operations. And if you could talk about that would be really cool.
Yes, good point. Let me make a note.
Yeah, particularly if you were to do, say, a multi-node cluster, whether the whole cluster goes down during the upgrade or whether this is a rolling thing that goes one node at a time, that'd be interesting. If that might be more of a deep dive topic, but I think it might be of interest.
Okay, I noted all this. Well, I'll make sure we cover this.
The other thing for Edge is maybe coverage of what the hardware requirements might be. It's pretty obvious you can run it on something like an x86 NUC or even a Pi. Is there experience base running it on things that look more like, say, hardware made for Android phones and things like that are often seen out at Edge?
Yes, so on that point, I think K3S has done a better job in the sense that the Kubernetes binaries by themselves, the way they come from upstream, they are not light. Okay, I don't think in the past we're targeting IoT devices. Okay, but they may be, they're probably we're targeting edge, but not IoT devices. So K3S has done some interesting work there, Rancher with K3S. I don't want to misrepresent them. So, but from what I've heard, they have removed some of the storage providers, for example, and they have also put all binaries, all executables in one binary. So this has a smaller memory footprint. Anyways, they have looked a lot into this subject, and I would be really interested to see a presentation from those guys as well. They are doing a good job. But yeah, definitely, if this group wants to push something for something, a smaller footprint on Kubernetes might be one of these things. Yeah.
Yeah, certainly this group, we don't own the Kubernetes code base, but we can contact the SIGs that do. So if in your development of micro K8s, you come up with ideas of what you'd like to see in terms of reducing the size of the Kubernetes binaries, I think that we can approach the people who actually own those packaging aspects and put the idea on the table.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that would be. Thank you very much for this. We will probably soon take advantage of this offer. Thank you very much.
Yeah, the way that is usually done is a group would start something called a Kubernetes enhancement proposal, which is just a doc entered under GitHub. But I've gone through the process before for other things, so that's where we could take that. But it sounds like we need a little bit more definition of what the ask would be.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Another thing that we are looking at, both us and K3S, so it's probably a common pain point, is the data store that is more or less Kubernetes is fixed on one etcd, which is great because it scales, it's well tested and everything. For IoT devices, we would like something lighter, and this is why we are experimenting with with embedded databases, so that we reduce the memory footprint. That might also be an interesting target for this group, because making Kubernetes work with other than etcd data stores might be an interesting use case.
Yeah, I think the Kubernetes project itself would approach that as trying to come up with a plug-in spec,
Yes.
for a key value store with notifications, change subscriptions,
Mm-hmm.
and they take it that far along with a test suite. But just kind of a comment I'd have is that would have been a lot easier to do a few years ago, before people started going off and writing Kubernetes plugins and CRDs, because I'm familiar with a lot of those that use etcd independent of Kubernetes to store state. And it's almost headed in a direction where the etcd usage becomes a thing bigger than Kubernetes itself, because I think there are some network plugins that store their state in an etcd database. Now,
Yes.
It could be a standalone one different from the Kubernetes, but in the smaller things you find at edge, I think people tend to lean towards consolidation. So there are operators associated with CRDs that are putting stuff in etcd as well.
Yes, indeed. We are running with Flannel, and we know that the instances of Flannel need to coordinate in order to distribute the subnets. Guys, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So they need to coordinate to decide on which subnets to use. And this is done right now only on etcd. So this is exactly one of the cases that you were describing, yes.
Yeah, the other thing is, if you look at the actual docs for running Kubernetes production grade, one of the things that, this isn't unique to Kubernetes, but in general, you need to start worrying about backups and a DR plan. And the Kubernetes docs tell you that the way to do a backup of your Kubernetes state is to do an etcd backup. Mm-hmm. Yet they don't document an equivalent process should you be doing something else. So you really, to take it into production, if you determine that aspects of your Kubernetes cluster would need to be recoverable, beyond just rebuilding it from scratch and having enough YAML or whatever to rebuild it atomically, you'd have to take that on if you were to propose an etcd replacement.
Yes.
And that might be a big job.
Yes, so definitely, yes. But on the other hand, when you have an org and you are thinking of taking in Kubernetes deployment, because this is what the rest of the world has, most of the times you're familiar with the DevOps that go along with a database, a normal database. So I think that in most organizations where they don't really need the high throughput that etcd provides, being able to hook the Kubernetes with a database, data store, and have the same DevOps for the database as they have them already, it's a big ask. I think it would benefit the Kubernetes adoption, but like that's only myth. I don't know.
Yeah, I think this would be an interesting thing to try to take on. If you could get the interesting parties, people doing Kubernetes distros for Edge like MicroK8's K3s in a room, and try to whiteboard and kick around ideas for an etcd replacement.
Mm-hmm.
That'd be a fascinating meeting. Whether it was, sometimes those kinds of meetings are best done face to face too, in my experience, rather than over a Zoom, just so people can scrawl things out on a whiteboard. But yeah, I think you're on to something there, that you're not the first person to come up with that. And
so even though this meeting has never officially taken place, in reality, we have Canonical has a distributed database that is embedded, and it's based on SQLite called DQLite. And the K3s guys, the Rancher guys created an adapter for that would basically shim etcd, and it has a backend for DQLite, and they call it Kine. So these ideas have actually evolved organically, and the collaboration is there. It's just that it's not official.
Well, I believe the official process for taking it to the next step within the Kubernetes project would be to use one of the contributor summit events. And those things are set up as a pre-event to a KubeCon. And you would typically have representatives there from the Kubernetes architecture SIG. And those are the people ultimately who would have to sign off on that being accepted into the project as a whole. But the contributor summit has, I think the one for Europe is still not locked down, so that you may still be able to submit meetings there and manage to put that on the agenda if you wanted to try to get that as soon as KubeCon Europe, which is last week of March. They tend to have enough of a quorum there, I think, at the contributor summits in Europe and North America to actually get things done. I'm not sure historically that they've had enough people show up at KubeCon China events to have a reasonable quorum. But you might want to try to put that on the contributor summit agenda. I don't know if are you in the database now as a Kubernetes community member, like a developer contributor? Because
yes. So okay. I have a very few, like a couple of pull requests accepted, but it's very minor.
So if you're in there, you should be getting invitations to the contributor summit. And then the contributor summit materials, I think, have a process for putting something on the agenda for the meeting. So the pre-event in front of KubeCon. So it strikes me that this idea of an etcd alternative would be a great thing to put on there.
Yes, I agree with you. Let me find a couple of links.
There's, I think the contributor summit has its own channel in the Kubernetes Slack, and then they've got a mailing list as well. Anyway, we're nearing the top of the hour, but if you have any trouble tracking that down, contact me, and maybe I can put can track down more resource on how one might go about getting that on the agenda for the Contributor Summit.
Okay, sounds good. I will contact the DQ Lite people, and we will. I will ask them if they are interested in doing this work, and we will proceed.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
All right. So I think we have 1 minute left. Anybody else got any topics, ideas, things you want to say?
Nope.
No, since looks like we're good.
Okay, it sounds like next time we might actually get our micro K8S and who knows what else, but
Maybe we can still get the Rancher folks someday to come and present, you know, K3S. That would be nice.
Yes, +1.
okay, bye everybody.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Yeah.
Bye, everyone.
Bye, everyone.